Welcome everyone. In this module, we'll talk about the fundamentals of Sprite particles. So with the help of Sprite particles, first we'll create the effect of smoke and the dust. And we are also going to learn the art of creating effective textures and images, which can be further applied to the end particles. Alright, so let's get started. In this clip, we'll talk about the Sprite particles. So what exactly is a Sprite particle? Well, the Sprite particle is a different kind of a particle category that provide an image or sequence of images on per particle basis. It simply, provides you the facility to utilize the texture of an image or the sequence of the images. And this can, make the task really very easier, and we can create some wide varieties of stuff like clouds, smoke, dust puff, sparks, pixie dust, stuff like that. In this scene, as you can see, I'm having particles, and these are basically the sprite particles. Well, if I just disable the texture mode and I press the shaded mode, you can see that these all are the images. So these are the square, particles. And now if I press the shortcut key 6 to enable the texture mode, you can see that how nicely these sprite particles are providing us with the look and feel of a smoke. And let me just play the timeline. Now see, with such minimum efforts, we can create a very nice looking effect of a smoke, and this is almost something real time. So notice that how fast it is. If one wish to create some smoke effect with the help of the fluids, yes, no doubt you can create some more better and detailed smoke with the help of the fluids. But sometimes it is required that even in the gaming also we prefer with this workflow, and this is something really very nice. All right, you can see this is giving you a lot of believability, the things which we already have inside the smoke, the opacity, the randomness, the change inside the, if you just take a look at, you can notice there is a nice subtleties inside the smoke. And if you just notice very carefully, you can see there are lots of changes going on, and these are just the simple sequence of the images. Hardly 50 images are there which are making the impact of the smoke. All right, so the most important thing is that how are we going to create the sequence of the images, because these are not the by default. We have to generate these images. One can also fetch these kind of images through the online libraries and all, but if in case you wish to create your own, then I think so you can get something more better control as well as a lot of freedom. So before we get started with the process of understanding the sprite particles, let's start with the process. How do we created this, the texture images or the smoke sequences? So for that, I have utilized the Maya fluids, and I have actually utilized the texture aspect of the Maya fluids. All right, so I'll do one thing. I'll just take a fresh scene, and now let's get started with the process of creating that image sequences. So let's go inside the FX menu, and over here we have the fluids. Go for the 3D fluid container, and this time we are simply working on the non-dynamic fluids. We are utilizing the texturing aspects and the shading aspects of the fluids. We are not going to create a dynamic fluid grids. All right, so just don't worry about that. And let's reposition this over here, and first increase the size of this fluid container. So let's say we go with the size of 20 by 20 by 20. All right, now resolution is something not very important in this case, because we are using the texture fluids or the shading fluid as in a form of a texture, not as a dynamic grid. So here the resolutions is not something very important, but for the look and feel of the effect, we can just use a small resolutions, maybe like 60 or 75. Okay, and since these are the fluids which will create the impact with the help of textures and shaders, so let's disable the dynamic grid of the density attribute of the fluids and use the gradient. So once you click this, you can see the fluid is now completely filled with the voxels, and this is giving us the look and feel of, you can say, a kind of a gradient effect. You can see from the corners it is showing some sort of a fall off. So we can create this furthermore we can go inside the density gradient and opt for the center gradient. So with that we have much better fall off effect. Alright, now let's do one thing, go inside the display and get rid of the boundary draw from the bottom to the bounding box. So this way we can have an even and quite a clean look inside the boxes of the fluids. Alright, now let's move further ahead. Now go to the shading sections. Alright, adjust the values of your transparency, because this is a very weak kind of a smoke, or highly transparent smoke, so we are not required to have the smaller values of the transparency. We are just required to increase the transparency. And the first thing is to get rid of this rendering space. Instead use the display space, so that you can accurately judge what exactly is the settings of your transparency. And let's go with the value of 0.9 initially. Now the fluids are also trying to touch the bounding box of the fluid container, so we have the drop-off shape. We can just simply increase this attribute to have some distance away from this particular bounding box. Alright, so let's improve the overall opacities of the fluids by going inside the opacity channel, and let me just bring this graph a little upward, and that is something nice. Alright, so this way you can build your graph and just make this so that you can have some lot of crisp informations, or you can have some sharper informations inside the fluids. So we like to maintain a graph like this. Alright, now next important thing is the input bias. So if we increase the value of input bias, you can see that the fluids are getting a little bit more thicker, and if we are trying to decrease the fluid, you can see they are showing us with some more better fall off and rounding forms. So in this case we want to use the negative value, so go with the value of minus, let's say 0.35. Alright, and these are not the fixed value. There is no hard and fast rule to use only these values. This is just a kind of a startup, so one is allowed to experiment with all these values. Now let's go to the textures. One of the most important thing that I would like to draw your attention towards this point, that is the texture opacity. The moment you click this, you can see that as such nothing is happening, because we have disabled the texture mode. So you need to press this 6, and this is something very, very important. Many of the times I have missed this and just keep on playing with the attribute, and then at the end got to realize that I just forgot to enable the texture mode inside the viewport display. Alright, so just make sure that you press this 6. Now with the help of this you can actually see the effect of the opacity, and right now we are using a procedural map, that is a Perlin noise inside the fluid containers. And let's also talk about the important attribute of this Perlin noise procedural map. Here we have the threshold, so increase the value to the 0.2. Alright, so that we can have some enough thickness inside the smoke. Let's also crank up the amplitude to a value of maybe 2.25 something, or maybe 2 is better, I guess. And we have the ratio that defines how sharp you want to maintain the overall fluids. So let's say with a value of 0.7 it should be fine. And the most important attribute here is the depth max and the invert texture. So let's do one thing, let's first use the invert texture, and then we use the depth max to a value of maybe 5. Alright, this is very, very nice. So this will start giving you a lot of depth and some sort of sharpness inside the fluids. Okay, and obviously we can start playing with the value of amplitude, maybe 2.5. yes, that's good, no problem. The threshold maybe 0.1. Alright, and I think so more or less we have already created an impact of a kind of a fractal, you can say. So let's do one thing, let's take a pause, and I'll continue the topic in the next clip. Alright, so see you there.